Morning, church. And morning to those of you who are joining us online as well. We're glad to have you with us today. It's been proclaimed that we're getting back to normal. What is that? Right now, to be honest with you, normal feels abnormal. Because we've had 2 years of abnormal. And for 2 years, well, Darren walked in. I hadn't thought about it. And Darren said it was 2 years ago today that we had the Great Flood. Wiped everything out. Things have not been normal for 2 years. They really haven't. And now we're taking the mask off, and now our lives are going to change back. But you know what? We are very much, aren't we, creatures of habit. God made us that way, designed us that way. It's a good thing, not a bad thing, that we are like we are. But we've gotten into habits in the last 2 years, haven't we? Particularly in the last 15 months. And now we have to change how we think, how we approach things, how we look at things. And change is never easy, is it? And so it's going to feel awkward for a while not to have a mask. It's going to feel awkward for a while when we can actually touch each other again. It's going to feel strange that we have Sunday night gatherings again and Wednesday night gatherings again, because for so long we haven't, and it needs restructuring again, our calendars and our priorities, and doing things different than we've been doing them now for a couple of years. That doesn't mean it's not a good thing. It's just a challenge that all of us face, that all of us individually are going to have to experience. This morning, I want us to spend some time talking about, wow, that's way ahead of where it's supposed to be. Okay, Dan, enjoy life, because that's what I'm going to talk to you about. Is enjoying life in the face of the challenges of change and difficulty. I heard the other day a stat that really bothered me. There was a study that had been done by WHO that said that they projected that there would be over 700,000 people who would die prematurely because of overwork. And they defined overwork as people who had put in more than 55 hours a week. Now, that's a lot of hours. Okay? It's a lot of hours. But think about the fact that that's going to kill people. And it does. There's no question at all that stress and overwork, that not giving ourselves time to renew ourselves, isn't good for us. It's not healthy. Life is meant to be enjoyed. It is. And this morning, that's what I want us to spend some time talking about, is how we can enjoy and savor this life that God has given to us. Let me see if this thing will click now. Life is meant to be enjoyed. Isn't it true, and I hate this, but aren't Christians often pictured as scared to death that somebody's going to have a good time? And I hate that, because, you know, I was raised in the church. And frankly, I've never known Christians to be that way. Now, are some people wired to be kind of dour and down on the mouth? Yeah, but that's not the vast majority of people. It's not. And that's not the vast majority of Christians. I don't remember growing up being afraid to have a good time. You have this picture of people, you know, they say raised on vinegar and weaned on a pickle. And, you know, it's unfortunate that there is that view, and that certainly, I believe, should not characterize us as children of God, because the fact of the matter is that when Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, one of the primary fruits of that fruit of the Spirit is what? Joy. It's joy. I want you to consider the biblical picture with me this morning, and then we're going to look at some principles in regard to the importance of enjoying life. Within the law of Moses, have you ever thought about the fact that God encoded in His law for His people? When He told them, this is how I want you to live, He said, oh, by the way, there are at least 4 feasts, each at least a week long, that I want you to observe during the year. Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles, and dedication. Now, that means that mandatorily, He told His people, you are going to take some time in which you're going to be with each other, in which you're going to enjoy life, and you're going to enjoy each other. You're going to celebrate the life that you have. He encoded it within His law. You are going to have a time to just enjoy yourself and the life that you've been given. In Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 7 through 9, the wise king, as he writes, says this, go, eat your food with gladness, drink your wine with a joyful heart. For it is now that God favors what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love. Enjoy the time that you've been given. It's a blessing. Jesus Himself, He is a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Isaiah 53, verse 3. And that's true, okay? And it's been always interesting to me that as you look at the pictures that often are painted of Jesus, because we have no idea what He looked like. There is no physical description of our Lord anywhere in Scripture. How often do you see Him portrayed and He looks sad, looks worn out, looks sober, looks like the weight of the earth is on His shoulders? Particularly when you go back to the Renaissance period in that time, almost always that's how He's portrayed. Now, more recently, and I think more accurately, we see our Lord portrayed as laughing, as smiling. And in many ways, I think that's more appropriate, because I really believe that when the apostles walked with Him and talked with Him and mixed with Him from day to day, that they didn't see Him as dour and dark at all. I think He was a man who enjoyed life. I mean, the first miracle that we have that He performed in John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, at that wedding feast of Cana where He turns the water into wine, where is He? He's at a party. He's at a celebration. And clearly, He's right in the middle of it. In Matthew 11 and verse 19, falsely, He's going to be accused of being a glutton and a drunkard. But if He lived off in a cave by Himself and never had anything to do with anybody and was very dour and all, that never would have been an accusation. Okay, that's not how He lived at all. Jesus knew how to live life in a healthy, wholesome, godly way. And I think because God has blessed us with life, it's so important that, having been through what we've been through the last couple of years, that we savor and appreciate and enjoy life. 6 principles that I believe will allow us to enjoy life more that I want to share with you. Number 1, please choose to die living rather than to live dying. I so appreciate the attitude of the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4. He's in prison. Clearly he knows he doesn't have much time left. And read 2 Timothy 4. And you don't find the words of a dour, depressed man. You find the words of a man who, even in prison, even facing the fact that his life is soon going to end, is basically saying what? I'm looking forward to that crown of life that the Lord, the righteous judge, is going to give to me in that day. I am anticipating that. And you don't find this man in any sense dour and down at this point. He is living life to the fullest, right to the end. making plans, writing these letters, looking ahead. You know, I love Big Butto and Selena. I did. They were such a breath of fresh air. You know, they didn't find each other until late in life. And they loved one another, and they celebrated life with each other. I just love being around them, love seeing them, love the way they savored each other, savored their relationship, savored life, and thank God for every day that they had together. They showed us how to live life. They chose to die living, not live dying. I have seen in more than one case a wife lose her husband and shut herself up in her house, and from that point forward, she's dead too. Now, she's still alive, but she's dead. She quits living. She cuts herself off from everybody, sits in her dark house alone, and broods. What a tragedy. What a loss. I don't believe that is at all what God intended for us in this life. Not everybody's going to be familiar with this name because Rural's been gone for a long time now. But back in the mid-20th century, particularly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Rural Lemon was quite a force in the church. A powerful voice for evangelism, a powerful voice to advocate reaching out into the world with the gospel. He edited the Firm Foundation. Rural came to our house one evening and had supper with us and had a chance to visit with Rural. And he was well advanced in years at that point, but I was struck by the life in a man. How excited he was about living, how excited he was about the future of the church. He just sat there and just talked about plans he had, ideas, concepts that he had, some of which, by the way, that our brethren in the last few years have implemented. Which I find fascinating that he was looking that far ahead. But that man lived life every day, okay? He wasn't living, dying. He was choosing to die living. And that's the kind of attitude I think that all of us need to have. I so appreciated that. Secondly, please take life and yourself a little less seriously. Remember these 3 bits of advice. 1, a mistake's not the end of the world. Often we treat it as though it is. When's the last time you made a mistake? You know what? Did the sun come up the next morning? Did life continue? It sure did. You made a mistake and the world did not come to an end. And it's not. We all make mistakes. Some mistakes are bigger than others. Some mistakes have bigger implications than others. I'm not arguing that. But what I'm saying is that a mistake's not the end of the world, and it's a tragedy when people allow a mistake to basically shut down their lives. And they quit living because of the consequences of that mistake. No. Keep on with your life. A mistake's not the end of the world. Failure doesn't mean that you are one. In fact, there's a very real sense in which we oftentimes fail our way to success. Because sometimes you have to figure out what not to do in order to figure out what to do. And that means you may have to fail multiple times before you finally succeed. So many people are afraid to try, afraid to embrace life because they're afraid they'll fail. You're going to fail. All of us fail. The issue is, how are you going to deal with that failure? And thirdly, and this is so important, brothers and sisters, there are so many things that are out of our control. Things that we can't do a thing about. And we need to accept that. Jerry David, who's not here this morning, but Jerry David the other day was talking about coaching. And he was talking about, and it's absolutely true, that you have a team, and boy, it looks like this team ought to go to state, but there's a zillion things that can keep that from happening. One of the girls' parents could move. One of the girls could break her leg. Disease could come along. Scholarship issues, grade issues could come along. There's a zillion things that can happen that at the first of the season, it looks like this is the way it's going to be, and by the end of the season, it's not that way. And you can't control that. I would have lost my sanity years ago if I had not come to accept that this is the truth. I can't make you do anything. I can't make you believe anything. A couple comes to me and they want to save their marriage. I can't save their marriage for them. They've got to save it. I can't make two people love each other. I can't make two people forgive each other. I can't make you love the Lord. I can't make you do what's right. I can't. And you can't either. I watch parents grieve over the decisions their children make, and it breaks their hearts. And yeah, but you know what? That's out of your control. There's nothing you can do about that. They are independent. They are their own person. If you taught them and showed them what's right, then that's up to them from that point forward. It is. So many things are out of our control. And too often, we want to live our lives as if we are in control, okay? When we're not. We need to accept that. Let God take care of a whole lot of stuff that we can't take care of. Thirdly, slow down. It fascinates me. Carol and I walk a lot on Binge. We walk up and down Binge, and when I drive over Binge and when I walk over Binge, I get two totally different experiences from Binge Road. When I'm driving down Binge Road, my focus is on, I don't want to hit that pothole, I don't want to hit that pothole, I want to dodge that pothole. I mean, that's driving on Binge Road now. Yeah. And my focus is totally on not wrecking my car and staying alive until I get off Binge Road. When I walk Binge Road, I get to see the cattle out in the pasture. I get to see the baby calves. I get to see the horses. I get to see the insects and the birds. I get to stop if we want to and look at the creek. I get to see so many beautiful things, all the wildflowers, and notice all the beauty of nature. Look up at the hills, enjoy the hills, and just savor how beautiful God's creation is. But I got to slow down to do that, folks. And way too often, we're in way too big a hurry. Have you ever noticed the difference between how a dog and a man treat and eat a ribeye steak? Hopefully, you get that ribeye, you cut into that thing, and you pull out a piece, and you savor and talk about how tender and the flavor. What's a dog do? Go! It's gone. They don't savor it. They don't taste it. They gulp it down as fast as they can, and they don't enjoy it. They just gulp it. Too often, I think we just gulp life. We don't give ourselves time to savor it and time to enjoy it. Read this remark that was made to a man hurrying through life. Have you ever considered that instead of chasing happiness, it might be behind you, trying to catch up? Think about that. How many people go on vacation and they come home and it was not a vacation? It was a quest. We're going to drive 2,500 miles in 7 days. And we're going to see this and this and this and this and this in that period of time. And the last day they get home and they are absolutely worn out, theoretically having a good time. When Carol and I went to Italy, it was beautiful and we thoroughly enjoyed the time that we spent in Italy. We came home exhausted because it was a quest. Every day you're up and you go here and you go there and you go, because we've got to see this, we've got to see that, we've got to see this, I want to see this, I want to go here. And that's all good, but vacation, not so much. Rest, not so much. How often do we do that to ourselves? Do we take time when we really could recreate ourselves? And instead, in the name of recreating ourselves, what we really do is just exhaust ourselves and wear ourselves out. Slow down. Enjoy the time that you've been given. Fourthly, learn to savor life. You know, in 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 17 and 18, it strikes me, Peter, looking back on his life, says, you know, the thing that I really remember, and obviously it meant a lot to him, and he thought about it a lot, was that fateful day up on that mountain when his Lord was transfigured. He says, man, I'll never, ever forget that. He savored that. That was a life-changing time for him. In 1 John chapter 1, verse 1, as John begins his letter, I don't think it's accidental that he begins by talking about, wow, I got to see the Lord. I got to listen to him. I got to touch him. I think the longer he lived, the more he savored that time that he had had with God in the flesh, walking this earth, really appreciating the blessing that had been. Are there some moments that are imprinted on your mind and your heart forever? Why aren't there more? Because we have those times. We have those moments. But how many of them do we have? And is it that life hasn't delivered those moments? Or is it we haven't given ourselves time to really savor and appreciate them? Man, I would urge you, savor the time that you have with your mate and with your children. We've shared over 50 years together now, Carol and I. And I savor every day even more the time that we have. I appreciate it even more, not less. Because I know that time's limited. I know we don't have forever. Savor that time. Savor that time that you have with your children. Because one of these days, they're going to move out. And they're going to move off. And you're not going to be able to see them every day. In fact, my brother was telling me yesterday he hasn't seen his grandkids since March a year ago. And tomorrow, well, actually today, he was going to go see them for the first time in that period of time. Savor that time that you have with your mate, with your children, that time that you share with your friends. Man, that's a blessing from God. And we really do need to savor and enjoy that time. In Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42, we read about Jesus coming to the home of Mary and Martha. And Mary is sitting outside with Jesus, and she's sitting at his feet, and she's listening to him, and Martha's inside, and she's banging pans, and she's cooking, and she's making dinner, and she's ticked because she's having to do it, and Mary's outside with Jesus. Do you remember what Jesus says to her? Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about so many things. One thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion. There's lots of stuff that we can be involved in, lots of stuff that we can be doing, lots of stuff that we can be wrapped up in. What really matters? What really counts? What's really, truly important? Learn to savor that. Beware of how easily things can come to own you. In America, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, is stuff owning us. You remember the story of Nabal? In 1 Samuel 25, David comes up to his ranch spread, whatever you want to call it, and he requests some food for his men, and Nabal said, ain't no way I'm giving you a thing. I don't owe you anything. Well, he's been protecting Nabal from attacks and enemies. His flocks have been secure. And it makes David furious, but Abigail comes out and pleads the case for David not to punish the whole clan for what she calls the foolishness of the fool, of Nabal. What's his problem? His problem is he's so wrapped up in his stuff he can't see past the end of his nose. And she, his own wife, calls him a fool for that. In Luke chapter 12, verse 15, remember Jesus will say, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. You'd never know that looking at our culture. Of course it does. I've told you time and again how many people can't pull their cars into their garage because the garage is full of stuff. And the garage is supposed to hold your car and protect your car. The car's set outside in the hail and snow and rain and whatever because we've got so much stuff our house can't hold it all, and so we stick it into our garage, and then we have to go rent buildings on top of that to store the rest of it. And it's just stuff. By the way, have you noticed, I'm fascinated by this, have you noticed how yards are getting smaller and smaller? A while back we were down in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and you know, they call them McMansions. Down there, they're these huge million-dollar homes, and their yards are about as big as this pulpit area right here. There's no yard around the house at all, and that's what they want. Because the owners don't want to have to mess with the yard. They don't want to have to mow grass. They don't want to have to tend to it. They've decided that in way too many cases, that yard's not worth the time it takes to mow it. And so I just don't want a yard. I was fascinated to see hundreds of great, big, huge homes with little bitty tiny yards. And it's because that's what they want. I had a buddy who took me into his bedroom one time, and he went in and he started reaching under the bed and pulling out case after case after case. And he opened it up, and man, he had some of the most beautiful shotguns you have ever seen in your life. I mean, these things had engraving in them, gold inlay in them, the most beautiful woods in the stocks. These things were absolutely, spectacularly gorgeous and incredibly expensive. And he had never fired one of them. And he spent all his time working to pay for them. Never enjoyed them. This is ironic, never knew the man to go hunting. Collected all these guns, never knew the man to go hunting. He was too busy trying to pay for everything that he was sticking under the bed. How often is that the case for us? We're so busy trying to pay for the stuff we've got, we can't even enjoy it. Be aware of how easily things can come to own you. And sixthly and finally, I would strongly urge you to create mini vacations for yourself. You know, I think it's instructional in Mark chapter 1, verse 35. We're just being introduced to Jesus. And one of the first things that Mark's going to tell us about Jesus is that he takes time to go off by himself to talk to God, to renew himself. I mean, he's surrounded by people all the time. There's all this stuff going on. You read about a day in his life, and I mean, it's just crazy, all that's going on. But he creates time. He makes time to be with his God and to, in a very real sense, renew himself. When you have to go sit somewhere and wait, bring a book or a tape. Instead of sitting there and twiddling your thumbs and getting impatient, and I'm real good at that, I mean getting impatient. If my appointment's at 2 o'clock, I want to be in there at 2 o'clock, not 2:45. And you know, so often, you go see the doctor or whatever, you're just going to sit there. Well, take a book. Bring a tape. You'll have your phone, won't you? So, you know, read something on your phone. Listen to something on your phone that's worth hearing, and redeem that time and enjoy that time instead of sitting and just fretting about that time being wasted. If it's being wasted, it's because you're wasting it, because you're not utilizing it. And you could in a wonderful way. I would encourage you to run away for an afternoon or an evening or a day. That can be incredibly renewing to do that. It doesn't take a lot of time to have some time. Have some friends, and About once a month or twice a month on a Saturday, they'll just take off and they'll go somewhere. Somewhere in this state, not real far, or maybe over in Arkansas, Missouri, just go see something and just get away. Just enjoy each other and see something new. What a beautiful thing. Really, what a gorgeous thing. And not that difficult to do if we would just do it. And very, very renewing. And you can't give what you ain't got. And if you're exhausted physically, and you're exhausted mentally, and you're exhausted spiritually, you don't have anything to give to your wife, to your husband, to your kids, to your friends. Running through this life so hard that we're just panting at the end of every day and falling into bed, that's not what God planned for us. Sometimes it works that way. Sometimes things are beyond our control and it has to be that way. But when it's possible to take control of your life, take control of your life and enjoy life. It's the devil, not God, who would rob us of the enjoyment of life. Remember, Psalm 118, verse 24, "This is the day the Lord hath made. Rejoice and be glad in it." I firmly believe God meant for His people to enjoy life. As I mentioned earlier, remember, the second fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:22, is what? Joy. Brothers and sisters, when you enjoy life, you glorify God. You really do. This morning, if we can help you enter into that relationship with the Father, as you confess Him and put Him on in baptism, if we can help you in your walk with Him in any way, we would encourage you to come while we stand and while we sing. Clock's counted down to 0. Says it's time for us to begin class. We appreciate all visiting, the fellowship, and it really is good to see one another literally face to face for a change. Although I told Buddo I kind of reserved my opinion on that. To some degree, seeing him face to face is kind of off-putting. Mask helped a little bit. We appreciate very much all of you being here. We're going to be studying Proverbs this morning, and in particular, if you would like to open your Bibles to Proverbs Chapter 10. We'll be looking at some verses out of Proverbs 10 this morning. I think it's important to make some introductory remarks about 10 and also just to kind of reiterate some of the things we talked about in introducing the book of Proverbs itself. Proverbs, the first 9 chapters, remember, are basically an introduction. And we have a book that's 31 chapters in length. That's roughly a third of the book is introduction. And in that introductory third of the book, there are 2 themes that Solomon will repeatedly discuss. And those 2 themes are wisdom and sexual purity. Now, he will talk about how important wisdom is. He will lament that there's not more wisdom in this world than what there is. He will personify wisdom as though it were a person walking around the streets looking for someone who will listen and who will pay attention. And he'll talk about how wisdom, in essence, comes from 3 sources. It comes from God and from His Word. And certainly, who knows better how to tell us to live than the one who created us? Secondly, it comes from listening to wise people. People who have been through it, people who have seen life, and people who can share their wisdom via life experience with us. And thirdly, it comes through our own experience of life. As we live and experience life, as we win some and lose some, as we talked about this morning, as we make mistakes and we fail, but we learn from that, we gain wisdom. And so it's so important, Solomon says, that we embrace wisdom. He'll say, listen, wisdom is more valuable than fine silver. In other words, to be wise is way better than to be wealthy. And there's a lot of truth to that. Because there are a lot of people who are very wealthy and aren't wise, and look at the misery that's in their lives. Wealth doesn't produce happiness. It doesn't produce a productive life. It doesn't produce any of that. It doesn't come accidentally. It's so important that we make wisdom a priority in our lives. And then he talks, secondly, interestingly, we talked about this last week, about sexual purity, and he really pounds on that. And like I told you at first, I really struggled with why the emphasis on that when there's so many other things that seem so important as well. But the more I thought about it, the more I struggled with it, the more I read, the more it made sense to me. God always knows a whole lot better than I do what needs to be said. I just have to figure out why he's saying it. And when he talks about purity sexually, what he's talking about is, listen, if you'll just keep yourself pure sexually, do you realize how many bombs you will not lob into your life and into the lives of other people? The messes that you will not make if you keep yourself pure. That purity sexually has so many positive blessings associated with it. And impurity has so many incredible complications associated with it. You want to blow up your life, just start pursuing the course that the world's recommending today in the name of freedom. And what you're going to find isn't freedom. I guarantee what you're going to find is bondage. What you're going to find is confusion. What you're going to find is heartbreak. What you're going to find is a mess. And Solomon understands that. And so early on, those two emphases on, I would argue, moral purity, sexual purity in particular, and wisdom. Now, we come to chapter 10, and we come to basically the rest of the book of Proverbs. And I don't know, as you read Proverbs, probably one of the things that's going to strike you is that he just jumps from subject to subject to subject to subject to subject with these pithy little sayings. And, you know, one second he's hitting this, and the next second he's hitting that, and this and that. And because we are Westerners, and by that I mean we come from a Western culture, the European-American culture, our roots are in the Enlightenment. Our roots are very much in reason and logic and structure. I mean, we value that a lot in everything. And so when you read Proverbs, you go, well, man, he's all over the place. Okay, understand, to our culture, he's all over the place. To an Eastern culture, that's how they thought. That's how they wrote. That's how they structured things. Look at the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus jumps from topic to topic to topic to topic to topic. One thing about it, when you listen to him, you better listen close, because he's not going to stay on the same subject very long before he moves to something else. Okay? That's how they did it. That's not disorder, that's their order in comparison to our order. Now, what I found enlightening is, for instance, in analyzing chapter 10, one thing in 32 verses, and please remember, okay, there were no chapters and verses when Solomon wrote Proverbs. Y'all understand that, right? I mean, all that's inserted artificially by mankind way later on. Okay, so when I talk about the fact that there's 32 verses in chapter 10, that's because men put 32 verses in chapter 10 and started chapter 11. But in chapter 10, 12 of those 32 verses are going to talk about the words you speak. A third, basically, over a third of the discussion is going to center strictly on the power of our words to do good and to do harm. Now, he's going to use several synonyms in talking about our words. He's going to talk about lips. He's going to talk about tongue. He's going to talk about the mouth. But what he's talking about is what they produce, the words that they produce, and the power of those words. And I don't think that's accidental. That as we begin to move into these pearls of wisdom, if you would, that he's going to share, that right off the bat, so much of his emphasis is going to be upon our words because they are so incredibly powerful. They make such a difference in our lives. One of the things that sets us apart as human beings from the rest of God's creation is our ability to communicate. Now, evolutionary scientists love to talk about the fact, well, you can see animals and they communicate, and they do. Okay, they do. But not like we do. And if you'll think about it, communication in many ways is absolutely central to survival. For instance, bees fascinate me. And when a worker bee goes out and flies around and it finds flowers with pollen and it gets some, it'll fly back to the hive. And if you're familiar with bees, it'll do a dance. That bee will do a dance. Now, I have no idea what that dance means, but other bees do. The worker bees do. And what that worker bee is doing is communicating where that pollen is, where those flowers are. And so other bees will do what? They'll make a bee line, we call it, right? They'll make a bee line right to those flowers. They may be a quarter of a mile away. And they'll fly straight to those flowers. The directions are that good. How'd they do that? I don't know. But God designed them with the ability to communicate in that way. We've got 2 dogs at the house. One's a little Scotty, that's Mr. Angus. And one's about 3 or 4 or 5 times as big as he is, and that's Lana. Okay? Now, can they communicate? If you've got a pet, you know they can. Okay, they know when it's time for a treat. They know when it's time to be let outside. They know when it's time to come in. They know when it's time to eat. Ma, at lunch every day, feeds them a peanut butter sandwich. And Lana will be on one side and Angus will be on the other. And she cuts up that peanut butter sandwich and then she hands it out during the meal. And they eat it. And if we forget, they don't. And they will communicate. They'll come stare at you and bark and everything else because you forgot something important. Lana can come up to you and she'll just look at you. And you know good and well, she wants something. Angus is the same way, except he jumps. He'll just hop. And he's saying, hey, pay attention to me. He's not very tall, so he wants you to notice him. He'll jump up and down and up and down. They're communicating. Now you say, it's primitive communication. Yes, it is, but it is communication. And most sentient beings communicate in some way. They do. But not like we do. You see, God has given us this incredible, unique ability to convey with words what's going on up here. The challenge I face multiple times a week, and it's a challenge, is how do I get what's here out of here and into there, into your head, to where you understand what I'm trying to say. And sometimes we get that done and sometimes we don't, honestly, because communication is a very, very challenging thing. But we use words to do that. And we're so much richer because of these words, so blessed because we're able to share ideas and to share concepts. But boy, with that comes all kinds of heavy-duty implications, doesn't it? Implications for good and for evil. And that's why, it's interesting, man, you go to the book of James, which is the wisdom literature in the New Testament. I would argue, along with the Sermon on the Mount, the book of James is wisdom literature. Scholars will identify it in that way. I mean, he's telling you, here's the attitudes you need to have, here's how you need to live. And guess what he's going to focus on as much as anything? All of what we call chapter 3 is about what? This thing. And the power of the tongue and the danger of the tongue. Look how much time Jesus will spend talking about words. And look at how he will just rake the Pharisees over the coals because of the misuse of their words. Because what they're sharing with people, he says, this is making them more a son of hell than you are. Because of what you're misteaching these people. What you're doing with your words. Words are incredibly powerful, powerful things. And so when Solomon here begins to talk about the tongue, I don't think in any sense that it's accidental that there's an immediate emphasis on, if we're going to be wise people, that we think about what we say. How many times have you gone, did I just say what I think I said? Really? And if you could have do-overs, man, you would take do-overs in a second, wouldn't you? And you would unsay some stuff that you've said, because that's the power of the tongue. It's the power of the tongue. And the thing about it is, and we've got to remember this and honor it, James will say what? The tongue is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Because, man, it can be. And when words hit like a snake bite, they hurt. And they can leave scars that never go away. That's the power of words. And we need to be very aware of the power that they have to do good and to do harm. And so, I want us to notice what Solomon has to say here in chapter 10 about the tongue, about the lips, about the mouth, about our words. If you'll look in chapter 10 at verses 8 and 10 and 14 and 18. And I'm going to read those if you don't have your Bible open or whatever, but just listen to him. Chapter 10, verse 8. The wise of heart will receive commandments. Listen to him. Now this again is English Standard Version. But a babbling fool will come to ruin. 2 verses later, verse 10. Whoever winks the eye causes trouble. Same thing. A babbling fool will come to ruin. Down to verse 14. The wise lay up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool brings what? Ruin. There's that word again. Brings ruin near. Verse 18. The one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever utters slander is a fool. Now those are powerful, powerful words. Think about the image of babbling fool. That's not exactly complimentary, is it? To talk about a babbling fool. And he says, what's going to happen to a babbling fool? They will come to ruin. Now, why is that? When you think of a babbling fool, do you think of someone who has a great deal of credibility? Hardly. Do you think of someone that you would see as probably just pretty much empty-headed? If they're just babbling away, talking all the time, but really not making much sense or saying anything that really is worth hearing? A person that would be considered a babbling fool, is that pretty much going to automatically identify them as selfish and self-centered? Because if you've ever dealt with babbling fools, they could care less about what you're going to say. They're not interested in communication in the sense of interaction. They're just interested in talking. And they'll just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. When I was preaching in Portales, there was a lady who attended the congregation there who had pretty much, over time, and I hated this, man, but it's just true, she'd pretty much isolated herself from everybody. Because you didn't have a conversation with Frona. You just had this Niagara of words come at you. And they would just flow and flow and flow and flow and flow. And people got to, people are human beings, man. You get tired of that. I understand that. She would, periodically, she would call me at the office. And so I tried an experiment one day. Told my secretary, I'm going to do this. Answered the phone, it was Frona, and she began to talk. And she had talked for about 10 minutes, and as far as I could tell, hadn't drawn a breath in 10 minutes, hadn't slowed up at all. And I laid the phone down and walked into my secretary's office and said, time me, give me 5 minutes, okay? I'm going to sit in here, visit with you, and then I'm going to go back and pick up the phone, and I want to see if she noticed I was gone in that 5-minute period. And so I gave it 5 minutes and walked back in and picked up the phone, and she had missed a beat. She had no idea I'd laid the phone down for 5 minutes and hadn't been listening to her. We've all known people like that. And what is so sad is, in their desperation to be heard, they're not heard. Think about that. In their desperation to be heard, they're not heard. In their desperation to be recognized, they become, in a sense, almost unrecognizable. And it's a tragedy. When she passed away, I hate this, but it was a couple of days before anybody found her body. Because she had so isolated herself from everyone that people were petrified to come around her because they knew what would happen, the inundation of words that would come. She came to ruin. She ruined her marriage. She ruined her relationship with her son. She ruined her relationship with everybody. They ranched out in the country. She ruined her relationship with all her neighbors. She ruined her relationship with members of the church. This babbling that he talks about is a big deal that has all kinds of implications to it. And again, it goes back to when we're talking with others, is it more important that we be heard or that we hear? And I would challenge that in communication, it's a whole lot more important that I listen than that I talk. Because as long as I'm talking, I ain't learning anything. It's only when I shut up and listen that I begin to learn something. It's important in communicating with your spouse, and communicating with your children, and communicating with your fellow workers, and communicating with whomever, that you cultivate the art, and I believe it's an art, of listening to what other people have to say. Now, verse 18, back to verse 18. Whoever utters slander, he says, is what? A fool. Now, they do not use, in Scripture, they don't use the word fool lightly. If you'll notice, they are very careful. Writers are very, very careful about who they call a fool, because that's a powerful, powerful term. And it's not used very often at all. As I talked about in the sermon, when When Nabal is called a fool by his own wife, that is a big deal. And by the way, his name means fool. Okay? You just don't call, lightly, you don't call people fools. He says when you slander, you're foolish. Why is that? First of all, what is slander? Not telling the truth about somebody, right? It is spreading a falsehood about someone. It is mischaracterizing or misrepresenting them, isn't it? That's what verbally. That's what slander is. He says when you slander other people, you're a fool. Why? Well, for one thing, when you start lying about other people, how long is it going to be before that comes back and bites you? Because it will. Just look at what goes on in politics all the time. And what happens in politics all the time is people misrepresenting, lying about it, and invariably it comes back to bite them. Because the fact of the matter is, see, here's the thing. Truth will out. It will. If I'm telling you the truth about somebody, then I don't have to worry about trying to remember what I said about them when I was lying about them. Lying about other people makes life a whole lot more complicated, because not only are you misrepresenting who they are, but then you have to remember later on the lie you told. And some people aren't very good rememberers, are they? It is foolish to get into the game of mischaracterizing other people, of misrepresenting other people, because, man, that has all kinds of implications. And part of the problem with that is, and it's a big part of the problem, if you start mischaracterizing and misrepresenting other people, how long is it going to be before they return the favor? And you're heading down the road toward, in a very real sense, a kind of verbal hell, aren't you? That we don't need to have in our lives, that we don't need to be a part of. And so he says, only a fool is going to use their tongue to slander other people, to get into that game of misrepresenting and mischaracterizing others. Look at chapter 10, verse 19. When words are many, transgression is not lacking. But whoever restrains his lips is prudent. Matthew chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. Remember what Jesus will say about the Gentiles? He says they kind of babble on in their prayers because they think they shall be heard for their much speaking. And clearly what he's saying is God is not impressed with your verbiage. Okay, he's not impressed with your verbiage. He's impressed with your heart. Later on, or back earlier actually, in chapter 5, verse 37 in Matthew, he'll say, let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this, what? Comes from evil. Now think about what he says. When words are many, transgression is not lacking. Will you do this? How about a simple yes or no? Yeah, I'll do that unless, or until, or after, or before, or whatever. And the second we start into that, what are we doing? We're beginning to equivocate, aren't we? And ultimately, not that far maybe from lying about it. I'm not picking on car salesmen, but I kind of am. Not all car salesmen by any means, but some. I remember going to a dealership years ago, and we'd gone round and round and round about purchasing this automobile. And I finally said, Bottom line, what's this car going to cost me? Tell me, what is this car going to cost me? I want it in dollars and cents. I want an exact amount. What's this car going to cost me? Because he'd been talking about, well, we can make the payment this, or we can make the payment that. We can stretch it out this far or that far. We can vary the interest rate here, vary the interest rate there. We can do this, do that. And he wouldn't give me a price. Literally, what do you care about the price? What you really ought to care about is the payment. No, I want the price. And so he babbles and he babbles and he babbles and he babbles and he babbles, and Dan walked out. Took his keys and walked out. And I never went back to that dealership. Because he wouldn't tell me a simple truth. This is what the car is going to cost. How much is it going to be? That seems pretty simple to me, right? And then we can go from there. But what happens when you run into somebody and they won't give you a straight answer? Won't say yay or nay, but they babble on. Invariably, there's a fancy word for that. It's called obfuscation. Obfuscation means they're covering stuff up and lying about it. Bottom line is what they're doing. And that's exactly what Solomon is talking about here. When words are many, transgression is not lacking. As God's people, I really do believe one of the most important things you can do and I can do is be honest, man. Just be straightforward and be honest. Your word's good. Your yes is yes and your no is no. And that's the way it is. And that's how people know you, and that's how you operate. There is no substitute for that. It's incredibly important. It's wise to live that way. And we're out of time. Let's bow, please. Father, thank you for the wisdom of your word. Thank you for what it says to us about how we can live wisely. Please help us to be a wise people. Help us to make wise decisions. Help us to choose wise words. Help us to be contributors to the solutions in this world, not to the problems. Help us to truly be light and leaven and salt in this world. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for guiding us. And please bless us in this new week. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless. How are you?